This week on Vaticano, we follow Pope Leo XIV's celebration of the Corpus Christi Mass during his apostolic journey to Spain. We then explore the mystery of the Eucharist and join the Eucharistic procession of students and professors at Rome's Angelicum, led by Cardinal Mamberti. Next, we travel to Paray-le-Monial to discover the devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus and how it spread throughout the Church. Finally, we uncover the history and meaning of the Tantum Ergo, the liturgical hymn composed by St. Thomas Aquinas. For this and more, Vaticano starts now. Embarking on his fourth apostolic journey abroad, Pope Leo XIV touched down in Madrid on June the 6th. For a week, the Holy Father traveled across Spain, visiting not only the capital, but also Barcelona, Gran Canaria, and Tenerife, in a journey that brought millions of the faithful together for prayer vigils, masses, and personal encounters. Pope Leo's trip is the first papal visit to Spain since Pope Benedict XVI came to Madrid in 2011 for World Youth Day. One of the highlights of the journey came just a day after the Pope's arrival in Spain, when he celebrated the feast of Corpus Christi in the Spanish capital on June the 7th.
Estamos reunidos en torno a la Eucaristía.
We are gathered around the Eucharist, the gift of Christ's living presence among us. He who wished to offer us his life so that we might enter into communion with the Father and become his children, is here as the living bread come down from heaven, to nourish us with the very life of God, with a love stronger than death.
Con un amor más fuerte que la muerte.
More than 1.2 million people filled the streets of Madrid for the Holy Mass, celebrated by Pope Leo in the Plaza de Cibeles. In his homily, the Holy Father reminded the faithful that devotion to Jesus in the Eucharist must never fall out of favor.
Herein lies the task, to ensure that the religiosity which has shaped and defined this country for centuries is not a museum of the past to be visited, but a school of faith from which to draw even today. A school that teaches us to kneel before God and before our neighbor, because no one can kneel before the Lord and despise their brother.
Y despreciar al hermano.
Both the Mass and the procession were accompanied by a choir and an orchestra, with around 400 musicians. The procession began along Calle de Alcalá, one of Madrid's central thoroughfares. The route was adorned with 16 floral carpets, 8 on each side, made with more than 30,000 carnations. Numerous faithful joined the Pope, including many boys and girls who had recently received their first communion.
It is not merely a matter of bringing out the monstrance, but of allowing ourselves to be brought out of our selfishness and indifference of a comfortable, private faith, so as to respond to his invitation to conversion, to change our perspective, and to welcome his presence, which transforms us and makes us builders of a new world.
Meeting with the royal family and addressing members of Spain's parliament at the Congress of Deputies in Madrid, as well as Catholic communities, including his Augustinian brothers, Pope Leo called on Spain never to lose the memory of its roots, nor the courage to look forward to the future, and to remain a land of encounter, culture, solidarity, and hope. The same message resonated at the Corpus Christi procession in Madrid, where Pope Leo called on the faithful to embrace their potential to transform history.
Bebamos de nuevo de esta fuente eucarística.
Let us drink anew from this Eucharistic spring, which does not enclose us in private devotion, but sends us out to refresh our brothers and sisters, our families, the poor, the suffering, and those who have lost hope. Eucharistic grace transforms us and makes us protagonists of the transformation of history, a sign of hope for those we meet.
Y en signo de esperanza para quienes encontramos.
We'll be back to discover the hymn for Corpus Christi, composed by St. Thomas Aquinas himself. Among the Church's many chants and hymns, the Pange Lingua is especially linked to Christ's real presence. It's the hymn sung during benediction of the Blessed Sacrament, when the Eucharist is exposed for adoration. The hymn is a prayer of adoration of the Holy Eucharist, a mystery so great that it has left some with doubts and uncertainties over the centuries.
In 1263, there was a Bohemian priest who came from Prague to Rome to pray a lot and ask the Lord to enlighten him about the Eucharistic mystery. So he came to Italy, and when he came to Rome, his doubts appeased. So he thought he found some insight into this mystery. However, while on his way back to Prague, he stopped in Bolsena, which is a little town in central Italy, and his doubts started reappearing again. He decided to celebrate the Mass at the local parish, at the local church. And all of a sudden, while he was dealing with a consecrated host, he noticed that the host was dripping some stains of blood on the corporal, that is, the piece of fine fabric of cloth that is supposed to contain the Eucharist during the Mass. So he was really, really shocked and afraid, up to the point that when the Mass was over, he decided to close the corporal and to tell the Pope about what happened.
Providence would have it that the Pope, for reasons of safety, was residing in the nearby city of Orvieto. Upon hearing the news of the Eucharistic miracle in Bolsena, he was moved by the memory of a remarkable encounter he had experienced some time before and understood the importance of what was happening.
Pope Urban IV was precisely one of those persons who met personally Saint Julienne of Corbillan, who was the saint, the Augustinian nun, who spread the devotion and the cult of Corpus Christi. At the beginning, Corpus Christi used to be a local feast in the Diocese of Liège in Belgium. And Urban IV had this chance of meeting Sister Julienne when she was still alive. So he knew about the importance of celebrating Corpus Christi at the local level. In the Middle Ages, there were fierce theological debates who wrongly applied philosophical categories to understand the Eucharistic nature of the Eucharistic mystery. In that time, they really understood that reason, when it is properly employed, can help us to understand the mystery of God, or at least to have a better glimpse at it. But they were also aware of the danger that a wrong use of reason can sort of determine in our understanding of Christian mysteries. So it was not just a matter of popular piety and devotion in a single region as Belgium, it really mattered to the whole Christian world.
Once Pope Urban IV confirmed the authenticity of the miracle of Bolsena, he called upon two of the greatest theological minds of the era, St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Bonaventure, both present in Orvieto, to compose the liturgical office for the feast. But according to tradition, the choice between the two was not left to man alone.
When St. Bonaventure came to the room where St. Thomas Aquinas was composing his own hymn, he saw a dove who was dictating the words and presumably the melody to St. Thomas Aquinas. And that dove, of course, was a sort of symbol of the Holy Spirit. And given that there was this clear inspiration from above, St. Bonaventure decided to refrain from presenting his own composition to the Pope, so he gave the floor, so to speak, to St. Thomas Aquinas, who was then selected as the one who actually composed the liturgical office for Corpus Christi.
It was in this context that the Pange Lingua was born. To this day, the beloved Eucharistic hymn accompanies Eucharistic celebrations, adoration, and benediction around the world. In particular, its last two stanzas, which are customarily sung under the title of Tantum Ergo. Through the poetic genius of St. Thomas Aquinas, the hymn continues to draw us closer to the mystery of Christ's presence in the Eucharist.
I'm really struck by the fact that St. Thomas Aquinas praises the Blessed Sacrament in a very poetical way, and yet he's very attentive to the speculative dimension of the mystery. So he's really aware of the fact that our senses are not enough to perceive the mystery of the body and blood of Christ. As humans, we always begin our knowledge from the senses. However, the Lord can help us to see invisible things by virtue of supernatural faith.
Tantum Ergo Sacramentum veneremur cernui et antiquum documentum novo cedatri tui restet fides supplementum sensum defectui genitori genitoque laus et jubilatio salus honor virtus quoque sit et benedictio procedenti ab utroque comparsit laudatio. Amen.
At the words of consecration pronounced by the priest, acting in the person of Christ, the very substance of the bread and wine is transformed into the body and blood of Christ.
A true Eucharistic miracle takes place at each Holy Mass. Through the power of Christ's words and the action of the Holy Spirit, the bread and wine are transformed into the body and blood of Christ. And so the sacrifice of Christ becomes sacramentally present to the faithful.
The fathers of the Church, the early Christian theologians, note that if God is powerful enough to bring something out of nothing, to create from no pre-existing matter, then he is also powerful enough to take what already exists, bread and wine, and transform it into something that is essentially different, into his very body and blood. And he does that for our sake, to feed us so that we can approach him and enter into his very life and be elevated through this communion.
The mystery of the Eucharist can be unsettling even for the most devout. But as mentioned in the Gospel of John, Jesus' own disciples were shaken.
After Jesus talked about his presence in the Eucharist and about eating his flesh and drinking his blood, many disciples departed, and Jesus allowed them to depart. He did not call them back and say, "This is just a symbol," or "I am just using a metaphor here." He allowed them to depart. Peter's reaction should be our reaction. "Lord, to whom else should we go? You have the words of eternal life." Basically, Peter was saying, I don't understand exactly how this works, but I trust in you. I trust in your word. And if you insist on this, then it must be true, and you have the power to do it.
For centuries, the celebration of Corpus Christi has filled the streets of cities, bringing the Blessed Sacrament to the people. Among the many celebrations held in Rome, students, professors, and clergy of the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas gathered for their annual Eucharistic procession. The celebration marked 25 years of student-led adoration at the university and was led by Cardinal Dominique Mamberti, prefect of the Apostolic Signatura. In his homily, the Cardinal reminded the faithful of the importance of Eucharistic adoration outside of Mass and described the Eucharist as the physical proof of Christ's resurrection.
Lo riconosciamo presente nel pane
We recognize him present in the bread and the wine. We recognize him truly present under the Eucharistic species. And this is an integral part of our faith. Otherwise our faith is in vain. Because if Christ is not present in the bread and wine of the Eucharist, it means that he is not risen. And as St. Paul says, if Christ is not risen, our faith is in vain.
Cristo non è risuscitato, vana è la nostra fede.
St. Thomas Aquinas wrote extensively on the Eucharist and its importance in the life of the Church. Dominican Father Thomas Joseph White, rector of the Angelicum, described the impact of Aquinas in understanding this mystery of faith.
Well, St. Thomas wrote the most profound treatise on the Eucharist by most measures, in the history of the Church. St. Thomas understood that mystery deeply. He contemplated it, he wrote about it, and studying his thinking about the Eucharist here leads our students into a deeper appreciation of the Eucharist and also a capacity to not only pray more deeply, but also to communicate and explain the mystery of the Eucharist to the world today as missionaries of the 21st century.
For 25 years, students at the Angelicum have had the opportunity to visit the Blessed Sacrament between classes. One of these students, Marcia van der Straten, described the impact of adoration on the faith lives of her classmates.
This is just my 4th year in the school, but over the years I think I have seen more and more people coming to know Jesus and coming to grow in their faith, being able to spend time in prayer and adoration in front of the Blessed Sacrament. So I definitely think even in this short window of time that I've seen, it's had an impact on the people that I know, the people that I've seen, and it's definitely had an impact on me myself.
In a few moments, we'll be back to explore the deeply felt devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Christ's abiding love for mankind is expressed not only in the Eucharist, but also through many devotions, among them, in a special way, the devotion to the Sacred Heart. Although now observed around the world, especially throughout the month of June, this devotion was born in the small French town of Paray-le-Monial. There, Jesus first revealed his Sacred Heart to the Visitation nun, St. Margaret Mary Alacoque, in 3 different apparitions.
La première a lieu.
The first takes place on December 27th, 1673. The Lord shows her his heart, and she rests for a long time upon the heart of Jesus. Then the Lord takes her heart, immerses it in his own, and gives her a new heart, one that is burning, aflame. In 1674, the Lord appears to her again, not with a bleeding heart, but with a burning heart. And in place of the 5 wounds, there are 5 suns. The source of this fire is the furnace of the heart. The Lord once again declares his love and complains of ingratitude and indifference.
Des ingratitudes et des indifférences.
In the chapel of the sanctuary's basilica, where the apparitions took place and where St. Margaret Mary is buried, the Lord asked her to receive Holy Communion frequently, especially on the first Friday of each month. He also asked her to spend a holy hour of reparation on Thursday nights from 11 p.m. to midnight to meditate on his agony in Gethsemane and keep him company in his sorrow. The third apparition, however, is the most well-known.
The third principal apparition takes place in June 1675. The Lord appears to her again before the Blessed Sacrament and says, "Behold his heart, which has so loved men." He then asks her, as an act of reparation and love, to establish a feast in honor of his Sacred Heart in the Catholic Church.
Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque was not initially believed when she spoke of her visions. It was only with the help of Saint Claude La Colombière, a Jesuit priest serving the local community, who became the convent's confessor and Saint Margaret Mary's spiritual director, that the devotion gradually gained acceptance and began to spread.
He came in contact with her and very quickly, believed the authenticity of these and became her tireless defender and promoter. Not long, even after he left, at some later point after the initial apparitions, Margaret Mary saw another vision in which Jesus appeared to her, and she also saw Saint Claude La Colombière next to Jesus, and in point of fact was told that he would be the person, and that through him the Society of Jesus would become the organization to diffuse and spread this devotion.
With the help of bishops and lay associations, many Jesuits worked tirelessly to extend the reign of Christ's heart by establishing confraternities dedicated to the Sacred Heart. Gradually, especially after the approval and institution of the Feast of the Sacred Heart by Pius IX in 1856, churches and altars were constructed across the world in honor of the Sacred Heart, including Rome, where its first international shrine was built.
È stato il primo tempio eretto a Roma.
With this devotion, the first church to the Sacred Heart of Jesus in Rome was built with the intention that, from here, the center of Christianity, this devotion could be spread throughout the whole world.
Anche essere proprio propagata questa devozione a tutto il mondo.
After the death of Pope Pius IX, Pope Leo XIII quickly took over the project to finish the construction of the basilica and continued to promote the devotion throughout his papacy. He elevated the Feast of the Sacred Heart to a solemnity, approved its litany, and in 1899, in a historic act, he consecrated the entire Church and humanity to the Sacred Heart.
He explained why he wanted to consecrate the world to the Sacred Heart. But he said basically, what is consecration? He says it's just the offering and the binding of oneself to Christ, and in that kind of simple way. But he says, that like all of our acts, that when we offer and we bind ourselves to Christ, we in a certain sense give God permission to act more powerfully in our lives. And when we do it in a public way where it's coordinated, not just individual people's binding and offering, we give God permission to act more powerfully.
In many ways, the power of devotion is reflected in the promises Jesus made to those devoted to his Sacred Heart, including the gift of peace in their homes, strength in life's trials, and comfort in sorrow. Above all, he promised the grace of final perseverance to those who receive Holy Communion on the first Fridays in 9 consecutive months. While devotion to the Sacred Heart continues to be lived throughout the world, Paray Lemonial remains a unique place for pilgrims seeking to encounter God's love.
Ici à Paray-le-Monial, on éprouve que
Here, in Paray-le-Monial, we experience that the Lord loves us. We encounter this merciful love, especially in Eucharistic adoration and in the sacrament of confession. Another experience we live here is having our hearts transformed, perhaps not in the mystical way that St. Margaret Mary experienced, but for each of us, the Lord takes our heart of stone, immerses it in his heart, and gives us a new one.